Welcome into the Locked On Reds podcast. On today's episode, we talk with Lucas Smith, and we look at the Hall of Fame ballot that just came out for Major League Baseball and why we think that there's going to be a couple of guys get in, and one of those guys includes Scott Rolen. We make that case for Scott Rolen here on today's podcast. Yeah, a Reds fan agrees with a Cardinals fan. That's going to be interesting.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Reds podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Carr, superfan and addict of all things Cincinnati Reds, really Cincinnati sports as a whole, but I've turned that addiction into information for you. Today's show, we got a special guest. Lucas Smith from Locked On Cardinals joins me, and we talk a lot about this Hall of Fame class, and we look at what the Reds and Cardinals are going to possibly do this offseason. Now, it's ironic because we recorded this literally minutes before the news dropped that Steven Matz had signed with the Cardinals, so you hear a little bit about that and some more as to what he thinks the Cardinals are going to do this offseason. And, of course, I tell him what I've been telling you guys. The Reds aren't going to do a whole lot. And we'll talk just briefly about the lockout as well. So let's jump right into it.
What's up, Reds and Cardinals fans? Got a little crossover for the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So before you go out and see your friends and family at your bar or at your house, we'll get some baseball talk in for your day. Jeff Carr of Locked On Reds, and I'm Lucas Smith of Locked On Cardinals here with you. Jeff, been a while. Happy offseason and happy day before Thanksgiving to you as well.
Has been a while. The Reds and Cardinals finished up their portion of the season pretty early this year, it felt like. So it's been a while since we talked. Happy Turkey Day. And kind of like you said, Wednesday. I was like 2 years ago old when I found out that the day before Thanksgiving is the day that everybody drinks the most in our country. Yeah. And I was not aware of that. Although I can't say that I picked that day to drink more than I drink any other day. So there's that.
Well, I didn't know. I think I figured out by watching some Jimmy Fallon skit, and that's how I figured it out. But the day before Thanksgiving, so tonight, my family always goes bowling the day before with a family friend of ours. We call it the Turkey Bowl. So I'll be able to drink this year. My first year being able to legally drink. I'm 21 now, so I'll be have some beverages tonight, but we'll be bowling and having some fun there. But we'll talk about drinking some other time. Let's go ahead and get into some baseball talk. There's obviously the bad news of a possible impending lockout that we'll get into, but we want to kind of focus the discussion on the Hall of Fame ballot that was announced a little bit earlier this week. Lots of newcomers and obviously some returners. What were your initial reactions and initial thoughts before we're going to talk about one player, and specifically Scott Rolen? Spent some time with Cincinnati and obviously time with St. Louis. But what were your thoughts, or are your thoughts on the Hall of Fame ballot this year?
There should definitely be somebody voted in this year, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they did the whole, let's not vote anybody in because we're cool last year. So this year, I think that there should at least be one. Mm-hmm. There's definitely a lot of guys that you can make cases for. There's going to be some interesting guys. I'm very curious to see how they approach Alex Rodriguez. If they approach him kind of similarly to the other people who were amazing during the steroid era, that means he's not going to sniff. He'll probably remain on the ballot, but he's not going to sniff getting close to being voted in this time around. So I'm interested to see how that works out, because I know that there's been a lot of changes with different voters and new people coming in, old hats leaving, things like that. So that's really the big one that I'm interested to see. And, of course, our mutual friend, Mr. Rolen, absolutely deserves to get in this time.
Yeah, I've got some numbers down. I was writing a little bit on a post-it note beforehand with some real high key stuff here to share on Scott Rolen. But I do think it's interesting about Alex Rodriguez, because not only somebody that was really good during the steroid era, but somebody who's been, for lack of a better term, caught during the steroid era, suspended multiple times. Do they handle him the same or differently than a Barry Bonds, than a Roger Clemens? And these are Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens last year, if I remember. 10th year for Bonds and Clemens, and 10th year for good old no controversy man Curt Schilling. He received 71% of the vote last year. It'd be very fascinating to see what happens with his vote, what happens with Twitter on the day that vote comes out. But let's before we get into Rolen, we'll talk about some of the first timers. You mentioned Alex Rodriguez, also debuting Carl Crawford, Prince Fielder, old NL Central foe, Tim Lincecum, author of 2 no-hitters, Justin Morneau, Joe Nathan, David Ortiz, Big Papi. I think this is the first real big DH conversation we'll have since Edgar Martinez, Jonathan Papelbon, Jake Peavy, AJ Brzezinski, former Cardinal, which I think I forget about often, that AJ Brzezinski is a former Cardinal, A-Rod, Jimmy Rollins, and Mark Teixeira. Any of those names other than Alex Rodriguez jump out at you on the first timers?
Nothing like crazy, at least not guys that I think are first ballot Hall of Famers. Some guys who probably could get in a few years. The Big Papi conversation for me is very interesting because I felt as though, I mean, Edgar Martinez was the most talented designated hitter before Big Papi. And then I think Big Papi is the guy when you think of the DH. And it's going to be an interesting topic because moving forward, I believe, with these new CBA negotiations, the DH is going to be a thing universally.
Right.
It's going to be all over the league. It's going to be a position that everybody has. And so this whole, not really disdain, but the trepidation that voters tend to have toward designated hitters because they don't participate in half the game, I think it's going to be challenged with Big Papi because Big Papi himself was quite a personality, still remains a big personality within the sport of baseball. And all that he did for the city of Boston, I think, has to be considered a little bit in here as well. So probably not a first ballot Hall of Famer, but definitely a guy that I think deserves to be in, maybe a year or two.
Yeah, I think for me, Cardinal follower, someone that David Ortiz did his fair share of damage in October. I have a lot of respect for David Ortiz, and we don't want to get I don't want to get too deep into it, but you think about it, designated hitters, in a way, very similar argument to me as a pitcher, somebody who participates in half the game. And yes, the pitcher's been around a lot longer than the designated hitter, obviously. But I think there is a certain point, as you mentioned, times are changing and times have been changed for a while and they will continue to change. It's going to heal all wounds. I think that the Hall of Fame is going to have to, the voters will realize one day that hitting in Major League Baseball is extremely hard, even when you devote 100% of your time to it. Even when you are the full-time designated hitter, it's still incredibly difficult to do and deserves recognition. And you're going to be pretty slim to find somebody that's in the Hall of Fame for their glove more than their bat. Brooks Robinson, Ozzie Smith, probably in that conversation. Not that they were bad hitters. You have to be a good hitter to, at minimum, to be in the Hall of Fame. But their gloves probably carried them maybe a little bit more than their bat. Ozzie maybe more so. But you're just gonna find a hard time. So I think that David Ortiz, if I had to pick one to be a first ballot Hall of Famer, Big Papi gets my vote. But I do think that we're going to see more people get in. You mentioned that nobody got in last year. Hall of Fames tend to work better when you have inductees, and I'm all for making the Hall of Fame like the top bar and not to vote somebody in just to get somebody in. Like I get that, but you do have to get somebody in, right? So I think that it'll be interesting to see. There are other ballots as well, not just BBWAA. But let's go ahead and get into Scott Rolen, because Scott Rolen is an interesting case. Longtime Philly, Cardinal, and a little bit with the Reds. What's your elevator pitch for why Scott Rolen should be in the Hall of Fame?
I think he did it all. When you talk about at the bat, he was a pretty solid hitter all the way through, and pretty solid almost downplays it too much there. That's the wrong word choice, but he was always a key contributor in the middle of the lineup for the teams that he played for. And when you're talking about out in the field, few people during his tenure in the league were better at third base. I mean, he was all over the place, constantly making plays, making a lot of web gym type stuff look like routine plays. And mostly with the eye test, when you watch Scott Rolen play, you thought this dude is one of the best that's ever done it. Now, you could definitely say he's not better than Brooks Robinson. He's not better than a lot of the guys at that position like Mike Shildt and things like that, but he definitely deserves to be in that conversation. He is not dismissed at all. I think it's interesting that he's had kind of teetered on the edge, not necessarily of getting kicked off the ballot, but teetered on the edge of getting close enough to be into the Hall of Fame. I think it just behooves the fact that this year is the year and he's going to make it in, because he absolutely has the resume, whether you're talking about postseason success, whether you're talking about regular season success. Put this man in already. I mean, come on. We've waited long enough.
Well, I think that it's just so interesting because when you think of Scott Rolen, for at least when I think of Scott Rolen, I think of the defense, obviously, think of big home runs for the Cardinals in the postseason. But let's take a look at his voting record, because I think a lot of times you have to look at who else is on the ballot, because who is on the ballot determines a lot about who these voters vote for. If it's somebody's last year that got 60% of the votes, you might throw a couple more votes their way to get them in because it's their last year on that ballot, right? Is that the way it should be? That's a different philosophical discussion. It's the way it is. But when you look at Scott Rolen's voting record, or on the ballot record, he got 10.2% of the vote in 2018. 2019, he jumped to 17.2%. 2020, 35.3%. In the most recent ballot, he was 52.9%. And there were no inductees in the class of 2021, as we've already talked about. So that's a 7-point increase, 18.1 point increase, and 17.6 increase. So on average, that's 14.2%, in case you weren't keeping up at home. So if he keeps on average and keeps a 14.2% increase, that will get him to 67.1% on the edge. So is this Scott Rolen's year? I don't know. It would have to be an above average year for the voters process to get him in. And when you look at the other people on this ballot, Curt Schilling got 71% of the votes last year. That was awfully close. That's 4% 4% away from getting in. And he was the only one that really sniffed it. Barry Bonds was 61, and Roger Clemens as well was 61%. So does them being on their last year, Schilling, Bonds, and Clemens, get them more votes or less votes? I think that if I had to say that one guy's going to get in, it's probably going to be Schilling. And again, this is a whole different conversation, but with Scott Rolen, I'm putting I wonder what BetOnline has on the odds on this, but I think that if I were a betting man, I would say that Rolen has a better chance of getting in next year, just with the way the trajectory is going. He's on pace to get in. Like there's no question about that. I don't think anybody is going to come on the ballot in the next 2 or 3 years to be like, oh yeah, Scott Rolen's going to get 0 votes and he's going to decrease the percentage, especially as time moves on. You look at the defensive sabermetrics, the different metrics that some might argue, and statistics might back this up. I've seen things. Don't come at me. Some defensive metrics have him better than Derek Jeter. And Derek Jeter was a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest shortstops of all time, the definition of a champion, the captain of New York, and Scott Rolen in certain defensive metrics was better than Jeter. Yeah. So I think that there's a huge argument on that aspect to have him in. And offensively, I don't think it's too hard to say that Scott Rolen, you could argue, was a better hitter than Derek Jeter. But again, that's a different discussion. But I do think at bare minimum, even if he doesn't get in this year, he's on track to get in.
And that's a solid point about the voting trends, kind of breaking that down. I hadn't looked that deep into how the voting had been broken down that way. And I'm totally here for how many times we're going to have to talk about the fact that Curt Schilling is a Hall of Famer, and we're going to see, now, here's what we're going to say about his on-field resume. I'm not really going to talk about anything else, but this is what he did on the field. Yeah, we're going to say that a lot. But when I look at that, it's an interesting note that he would have to take quite a jump to get to that threshold of Hall of Fameness. So it is interesting because I wonder, and whatever your take is on this, because when I think about the steroid era, that was still baseball. Those guys were still having to play, and I get it. Like, they did have a little bit of an unfair advantage with the come up and the different recovery processes that kind of got loopholed because of steroids, but the game still flourished. The game still grew, and fans were coming back to the ballpark to watch these guys. I feel like Barry Bonds should make it, man. Like, I know that there's that argument. I know that there's lots of people that want to put asterisks on everything. That's fine. Do it. Put asterisks on it. He was amazing in the time that he played, and I'd kind of like to see Roger Clemens in there as well.
There's definitely an argument for it, and I think the argument for it has a big reason to do with this. You have baseball's all-time hit king and all-time home run king not in the Hall of Fame for two very different reasons, right? But I do think that no matter what ballot Bonds gets in on, whether it's his last year at the BBWAA or one of the other election committees, whatever that he gets in, again, like I mentioned at the top, time's going to heal all wounds. And at some point, you've got to have baseball's all-time home run king in there. Did he cheat? Yes, he used steroids, and yes, but at the end of the day, it was an era when everybody was using it. Do I want to see him in? I don't know, probably not. I don't like to reward cheating per se, but again, it's just one of those things that he's going to be getting eventually. I think the same thing about Pete Rose. I just think he's going to be in at some point.
You know what it is? It'd be like if you go to the Museum of Natural History or whatever, and they omitted the T-Rex. Well, he really kind of killed a lot of things. Like, he was a real big murderer. We didn't like him very much. Like, I get it. You really probably shouldn't have been friends with a T-Rex, but you got to know about him. And if you're talking about the history of baseball and you're taking your son or daughter to the
Right.
Hall of Fame and museum, and they all of a sudden wonder, like, well, who hit the most home runs ever? Well, he's not here.
Right.
Really? He hit the most home runs ever and he's not in the Hall of Fame? And yeah, you can explain the pitfalls of steroids and things like that, but I think that it is something that in a way needs to be celebrated.
Yeah, I think that there's a way to do it. And I think that just in anything, whether you're talking about sports history or otherwise, you can't omit the negatives just because they don't make it feel great. Just
Right.
because it might not feel good to have Barry Bonds in. And again, there could be a middle ground here where you have a Barry Bonds or a steroid exhibit per se in the Hall of Fame, where you talk about this. Hey, this happened. We're not gonna ignore this because it happened. Ignoring it almost makes it worse. So you still have to talk about it and have that part of baseball history, because you can't tell the story of baseball without talking about the steroid era. You can't tell the story of baseball without talking about Barry Bonds. As painful as that may be for all of us, I'm not trying to be accusatory, but as painful as that might be, you just can't do it. Barry Bonds needs to be at least in the history books, in the conversation of one of the best players of all time, and we can talk about the context of what that comes in the conversation. But you can't just omit him. He was a great player before he started getting oddly big, we'll say, before he started lifting all those weights and hitting all those home runs. And that's what bothers me on a personal level, is that he didn't need those. He was a dominant player in Pittsburgh, and then that's a different discussion. I feel like I've said that 1,000 times. Sorry. But that's what bothers me on a personal level about it, is that Bonds didn't need them. He was so good on his own. Roger Clemens was so good, even at a very young age. But these guys, for whatever reason, felt the need to use them and went with the times. And it's a conversation we're being forced to have now about him. It's unfortunate. But to circle back to Scott Rolen, I do think just an interesting point again on the numbers. 14.2 is the average, but the last two have been 17.5 and 18. So if he got 17.5 and 18, that could put him right there, and a couple of votes might go his way one way or the other. But Scott Rolen is just such an interesting case to me. He's just, because I think he's beloved. He's loved in Philadelphia, St. Louis, and Cincinnati, three of the places that he played most of his career. What's a Scott Rolen memory that you have that you remember Scott Rolen fondly of in a red uniform?
I mean, easily there were a couple of great playoff performances that he had that obviously the Reds didn't end up advancing, but
Yeah,
a couple
there are
of
a lot
good
of
games
those.
there.
You have to narrow those down.
Yeah, that was the thing. There were a couple of really good regular season games where it was just like all of a sudden the Reds were in a bind and they had a couple of runners on base, and you were wondering how are they going to get out of this jam. And Roland makes an amazing play, and either starts a double play or just gets that one quick out that you're like, that changes the complexion of the inning right there. It's something that. Watch this team over the last couple of years, and just the whole idea of, yeah, all right, we'll outscore everybody. We won't necessarily care too much about what we're doing on the field as far as defense goes. We'll just hope to score 10 runs or something like that. It really makes you appreciate a guy that worked the glove as well as he did.
Absolutely. I think he's just another one of the great third basemen in the history of the game. And he's one of the great third basemen in Cardinal history. He was part of the MV3 of him, Edmonds, and Pujols. I think it was 2004, 2005 of the MV3. He had the big postseason heroics in New York in 2006, despite some of the off-field drama there. I think a memory that sticks out to me just with my timeline of memory for me, because I don't remember 2004. I don't remember watching 2006. I was 4 and 6 respectively in those. What I remember about Scott Rolen, other than watching highlights and being appreciative of him, was he was not a catalyst, but he was in the middle of the big brawl of 2010 between the Reds and the Cardinals. And I think was it him and Carpenter that were going at it, I think. He was separating a bunch of players because obviously he still knew a bunch of those guys, being shortly removed from that team. But that's what I remember, is he was trying to, as best he could, and as heated as that fight was, from my recollection, 10-year-old Lucas remembers him playing pretty well peacekeeper. You might have a better memory of it, but that's what I remember of Scott Rolen in a Reds uniform. Was him in that brawl. That was a nasty brawl that ended a guy's career. But Scott Rolen definitely has many more better memories than that one. But I do think that's my first physical memory, watching this on TV, seeing this guy, and I remember, oh yeah, he used to be a Cardinal.
And that was indicative of his personality for the team that he was on, whether it was the Cardinals or the Reds or the Phillies. He was a leader in that clubhouse. And
Absolutely.
I know that that's not really going to play too much into a Hall of Fame vote, but anybody that was on those teams in 2010 and 2012 for the Reds that were really good and won the division and went to the playoffs, they always talked about how key he was in the clubhouse and how much he was a leader and a guy that no matter if you were a rookie or if you were a vet, like I remember Joey Votto talking multiple times about, going over and talking with Scott Rolen about this or that. Like Joey Votto was the guy that was talking to him, and Joey Votto is the guy.
Yeah.
Even
MVP
back
candidate
then.
that year.
Right. I mean, he won it in 2010. He was really good in 2012, and he kind of dealt with injuries and things like that. But it was always going back to Scott Rolen. He was the guy that everybody kind of leaned on in that locker room. And it was definitely, there was no Reds fan, at least not to my knowledge. There might have been some, but I don't associate with those ones. But that were harping on him for trying to play peacemaker in that peacekeeper in that fight. Because there were so many people that were, you had Dusty Baker and Tony La Russa going after it. You had
two best buds, best pals.
Oh yeah, they loved each. I couldn't believe that. I loved it that they had to face each other in the playoffs this year.
Right,
coming back in completely different circumstances, but
yeah.
I mean, and you had you had the craziness of Johnny Cueto getting pushed up against the net, and he's like kicking people because he's like, I'm getting like crunched here, and just all that stuff that was happening, and it speaks really to his character that Scott Rolen was still worried about. Like, hey guys, let's calm down, let's take it easy here, in a more forceful way. It's not like he was whispering to people there.
No, there are Cooperstown is full of good clubhouse guys and good clubhouse leaders, and Scott Rolen would definitely be among the best there. Since we haven't done it yet, let's take a look at his numbers, shall we? His numbers across his career. He had 2,077 hits, hit 316 home runs, drove in 1,287 runners batted in, stole 118 bags, 281 the batting average, 364 the on base, 490 the slugging, 855 the OPS, 122 OPS plus. The average for that is 100. 122 would be then above average for that. When you look at his WAR, 70.1, the average Hall of Famer, anywhere from 50 to 70, so definitely on the upper echelon of the average there. So a lot of numbers point towards Scott Rolen being a Hall of Famer, the defense, the championships as well. So Scott Rolen, if I'm making a final point on it before we move on, I think he gets in 2023. What do you think?
I think kind of based on what you were saying, the way that the voting trend has been, 2023 makes sense to me. I don't know. Yeah. I still feel it. I feel this year. I think he's going to make it this year.
Well, that would definitely be a welcome surprise, or not a surprise, a welcome sight to see. And I wouldn't mind if he was the only one that got in. He might be joined by a couple other individuals in the Cooperstown Hall of Fame in 2022. But we're going to go ahead and move on to a little bit more pressing topics, if you will, as we move into the offseason. It's still the offseason. Baseball is still operating at irregular circumstances as of right now. Pending lockout seems to be all what people can talk about, but you're not wearing any Reds gear. And we talked about this off air about why. Why don't you tell some of my listeners, my watchers, why you're not wearing any Reds gear, and give us an update on the Reds offseason?
So it's something we've been talking about quite a bit on Locked On Reds. The Reds ownership, and it's coming through the general manager and the different interviews he's had with the press ever since the season ended. They have mandated almost day one of the offseason that they are realigning payroll with their budget. They are not worried about the holes in the roster. They are not worried about how they can improve and make the playoffs next year. They are worried about the dollar signs and how much people are getting paid. You saw that with Tucker Barnhart being traded to the Detroit Tigers to avoid even the buyout on his contract. They traded him to the Tigers, and the Tigers picked up the option. And to Tucker's credit, speaks to how good he's been. The Tigers are exploring options for extending his contract, so I was happy to hear about that. And then Wade Miley was given away. They literally put him on waivers. They didn't want to trade, or reports where they tried to trade him. But I don't know why you can't pick up a $10 million option and then trade him during spring training or something like that. I mean, he was awesome last year. He was statistically, arguably, the Reds' best pitcher. And they're like, no, we don't want to pay him $10 million. We don't even want to pay him the $1 million to buy out his contract option. We're going to put him on waivers and see if anybody's interested. Ironically enough, the Cubs were interested. So now he's pitching for a division rival. The Reds have been ridiculously cheap in this regard, and because of that, I said that I would boycott wearing any Reds gear, and it's been about 2, maybe 3 weeks now. It's kind of hard to tell, but I have not worn a Reds hat. I have not worn a Reds t-shirt. I am waiting until they actually make a move that makes them better for next year. If they bring back Nick Castellanos, fat chance. If they actually add somebody to try and replace the production that Nick Castellanos is leaving the void of in right field, that would be nice. Then I will continue. I will restart wearing my Reds gear. But for right now, yes, red polo. Yesterday on the podcast, I wore a Cincinnati Cyclones t-shirt.
Nice.
Minor league hockey team here.
Yeah.
I've worn Bearcats stuff because the Bearcats are amazing.
I don't want to talk about it.
I am very.
I'm an Illinois fan. That's why that comment was made.
Ooh, yeah. and they were close with Arkansas tonight.
Or they haven't even seen that final yet.
Right before we started recording, they finished up. Arkansas ended up winning 73-67, but yeah, it was
a good game.
It was a back and forth game all the way. There was this and okay, real quick tangent. There was this one possession right there at the end of the game with like a minute and a half left that Arkansas had the ball, and I swore they got like 8 offensive rebounds. Like the Bearcats just couldn't box out in that one instance, and I was a little bit annoyed. But hey, it was still a good game. Love Wes Miller. He is the answer. The future is bright for the Bearcats. But yeah, anyway, that's why I'm not wearing any Reds gear right now.
Sounds like we need to get a Locked On Cincinnati Bearcats podcast going, Jeff. I think you might be, not that you're not busy enough, with Locked On Reds, MLB channel coordinator for Locked On Podcast Network. You're not busy enough, but
yeah, no, I got time.
Yeah, well, the Cardinals have made a couple signings. Obviously, they started the offseason by re-signing, or not before the offseason even started, they've re-signed Adam Wainwright and Yadier Molina, so they will continue to haunt your nightmares for another year, Jeff. Sorry to say. As they, likely.
Molina was, oh, no, that's this coming year. He's doing the farewell tour.
Right, yeah. They've said that they're retiring, but Lord knows if Yadier Molina will ever retire. And Adam Wainwright has a spot in just about any broadcast booth in the country waiting for him because, oh my goodness, is he a good color commentator. Loved watching him, ironically enough, do the White Sox and Astros ALDS this season. So they made those moves. They re-signed TJ McFarland, left-handed pitcher that they acquired middle of the season as a double play machine, looking to re-sign Luis Garcia. Yeah, as well. Those two guys really saved the bullpen, man. I've been talking about this recently on Locked On Cardinals that, when the big three of Genesis Cabrera, Giovanni Gallegos, and Alex Reyes kind of got overused and taxed, these two guys are brought in as kind of no-name pieces, and they turned this bullpen around. Because instead of having one, maybe two guys every other night, you had 2 to 3, 3 to 4 options of guys you could go to. So I think Luis Garcia should be a top-line priority. He might cost you $5 million, but without that signing, the Cardinals have anywhere from $30 to $35 million to play around in payroll. As of this recording, they have not signed Steven Matz, although Steven Matz is expected to announce his decision by Thanksgiving, according to reports by John Heyman. And the Cardinals are one of, I believe, 8 teams in on Steven Matz, so could have Steven Matz. Marcus Stroman is also linked to the Cardinals. Cardinals Twitter has gone bananas and wanting Marcus Stroman. I think they got Marcus Stroman and St. Louis Cardinals trending on Twitter yesterday. That's how much they want Marcus Stroman. So hoping if Steven Matz is signed and Marcus Stroman is not, Cardinals Twitter might go a little bit different direction, but there are 3 ways for me that the Cardinals can improve their team. Shortstop, if they don't want to go the direction of Paul DeJong and Edmundo Sosa. Trevor Story would be a nice, cheap option given the market. Starting pitching, Marcus Stroman, Steven Matz, as I've talked about, or the bullpen. Luis Garcia would be a nice re-addition, if you will. Lars Nootbaar absolutely tore it up in the Arizona Fall League, so you feel good about him as a fourth outfielder. But this pitching staff was tested in 2021. Without Adam Wainwright, this team does not sniff the postseason because of all the injuries they dealt with and lack of performance. I'm not trying to just place the injuries as an excuse. The starting pitching also underperformed. So I think that starting pitching will be item number one. I would like to see them be aggressive and go for Trevor Story. I think that would be a nice reunion between him and Nolan Arenado. Paul Holden of Locked On Rockies might actually kill me if that happens. But I
take
think
Arenado and him.
That would be unfortunate for him. But I do think that it's interesting to see where the Cardinals go because they're going to spend the money. They said they're going to spend money. They might take a while. Well, John Mozeliak, president of baseball operations, said it might be a patient offseason, but they've got money to spend. They're no longer paying Matt Carpenter, Dexter Fowler, Carlos Martinez, Andrew Miller, all off the payroll. They did fine. Matt Carpenter had a tremendous Cardinal career, so that money is gone. They've got money to spend, and unlike the Reds, they are not realigning their budget. The Cardinals, if they don't make an offseason splash, if you will, and I would consider any of the people that I've mentioned, Story, Matt, Stroman and Story more so possibly. If they sign any of those, I would consider that a splash. And if a free agent signing does not happen in this offseason, color me shocked because I think the Cardinals are ready to win. They got a new manager. Not that they haven't even been winning because they've been winning, but they're ready to take that next step and go for a championship rather than a postseason run or a wild card berth.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned Stroman. He had a really nice performance against the Reds when the Mets played the Reds earlier last season. So I'd hate to see that on a regular. But you mentioned Mike Shildt, and that was something I wanted to talk to you about because I thought it was ironic. And I know that, we had talked during the season at multiple times, and I know that you were very unimpressed with Shildt, but I thought it was ironic that he was on the list for manager of the year, and the Cardinals were like, nah, we don't want him. I thought it was crazy. And there were so many people, so many Reds fans that looked at what the Cardinals did in that crazy win streak, and they made the playoffs, and they moved on from their manager. And then they looked at what the Reds did and the crazy collapse, and they missed the playoffs, and we extended our manager. What's happening here? How did you perceive all of that?
If I said this phrase once, I said it 4 dozen times. Philosophical differences. That was the reasoning behind John Mozeliak dismissing Mike Shildt. And what's crazy, too, Mike Shildt earned Manager of the Year votes in 2018. He won it in 2019. He received votes in 2020. And as you mentioned, he was a finalist in 2021. And in 2018, he managed a team for the second half. That was it. Mm-hmm. He was winning. What was it? That the prettiest of baseball? Was it the most exciting? Ron Washington with his, arm windmill at third base, exciting? Maybe not. But he was winning. He made a deep postseason run in 2019. 2020, any team who made the playoffs deserved recognition, especially the Cardinals, because of what they went through with COVID and the doubleheaders and et cetera, and the winning streak, as you mentioned. It came as a shock. That day, I just finished recording the podcast for that day because the news broke in the morning. And I hit end record, and I looked at my phone. I had 3 missed phone calls from my mother, and Twitter was going nuts. I didn't understand it because Mike Shildt had been winning. He wasn't the most popular with the fan base, and John Mozeliak did not fire Mike Shildt because the fan base didn't like him. But I'm just saying that for some context. Right. Oliver Marmol could make or break John Mozeliak's career as the Cardinals president of baseball ops, because this is the third man that John Mozeliak has practically handpicked to do the job. He hired Mike Matheny. He promoted Mike Shildt after Matheny got fired, and you could easily justify that firing, by the way. And then he has handpicked Oliver Marmol after firing Mike Shildt. Bill DeWitt said it was a difference between Mike Shildt and Mozeliak's camp, kind of dusting his hands clean of anything.
So, I'm picturing Moneyball whenever Art Howe is just refusing to set the lineup that Billy Beane wants. Is that kind of like what you're thinking too?
A little bit, but I think that, and again, this could be me, biting at the bait that John Mozeliak has let out. At least he has said that moving forward, managers will have autonomy. The manager will have autonomy. He has sold me on Oliver Marmol. Plain and simple. I'm really excited about the Oliver Marmol signing. I'm really excited about the Skip Schumacher as bench coach, former Cardinal, as well, with the rally squirrel in NLDS with his batting glove routine, ritual, and everything of that nature. So I'm excited for this coaching staff. You mentioned that I wasn't a fan of Mike Shildt. I was probably one of the more positive Mike Shildt defenders around. And what was I a huge fan of him? No, I'm not trying to just say you're wrong, but I will say that I defended him more than probably the average Cardinal follower did. So I think that it definitely came as a shock to me. I am looking forward to what Oliver Marmol does. It was weird to me too that if Shildt was let go for philosophical differences, then you hire his bench coach, which likely will have very similar philosophies to him. But you also never know. Coaches stay together a long time and could disagree on key things, butt heads on one thing. So I don't know. But it was a shock to say it plainly. And I do not think Mike Shildt is done in baseball. He's going to find a job. He's a smart guy. He's been around the game a long time. It was just unfortunate to see his Cardinal career come to an end like that after being with the organization for 15 plus years and working his way up. Basically a Brian Snitker, much shorter amount of time and without the cherry on top of a World Series trophy.
True. That was probably just one conversation. I was cherry picking a little bit there, but
no, you're right. His bullpen decisions left a lot to be desired. His lineup construction was either the same for too long or too sporadic. And again, it's I'm not getting paid to do it, so it might be a little easier for me to critique. But I'm excited for Oliver Marmol. But I have a question for you. So if Jeff Carr, you are GM of the Cincinnati Reds, you get to make one move: trade, free agent signing, firing, whatever. One move. What move are you making?
I think the obvious answer, and it's what I would still do. Like I'd like to say that I could think of something crazy and pull it out of a hat, and people be like, "Wow, I didn't think of that. That'd be a great idea." Resign Nick Castellanos. Like if you bring back Nick Castellanos, I think you're still looking at a team that. Yeah, it's got holes. It's got some pieces that really need figured out. And I read something the other day that said that they are considering doing the same thing that they did to fill out the bullpen this past year. And as any NL Central foe will know, that certainly worked for them, not for the Reds. So I don't know. It's not going to fix all ails, but it will certainly revamp a fan base that is absolutely, I mean, so far as my money is concerned, this is the lowest the fan base has ever been. Like,
really?
Everyone is looking at this team and thinking there's no reason to have expectations for them because they are telling us not to have expectations for them. They are telling us that we are they are more worried than their QuickBooks than they are about the win-loss total that they're going to have next year. And there's rumors about Castillo, and there's rumors about Sonny Gray, and very quiet rumors, and I don't think this would happen, but rumors about Tyler Mahle. Guys like that being traded to almost reset some things. And if you trade one or both of Castillo and Gray, you can forget about contention next year. The Reds are going to come in fourth. As the team is right now, they can be a plucky team that sort of fights there in the middle of the NL Central. And who knows, maybe they catch fire and fight for a wild card. Maybe that's a big stretch at this point. But the one move that I would make is to bring back Nick Castellanos because you can sell the fan base on having him on the team.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the clearer move, but it's clear and obvious because it's the right move, in my opinion. So I would agree with you there. Just a quick question, and you can give a quick answer if you want. You mentioned signing somebody to replace Nick Castellanos if he does leave, which I'm seeing reports of Miami being a fit for him, which is kind of surprising to me. But what are your thoughts on a Jock Peterson signing? Free agent, did a really nice job with Chicago and Atlanta, World Series champion. I would love to see, I wouldn't love to see it from a Cardinal perspective, but I think a Reds fan would be impressed to see that short porch in right field with that left-handed bat.
I would love to see it. It's funny because I have memories of Jock Peterson at Great American Ballpark because I was at the Home Run Derby in 2015.
Yeah. Whenever
Todd Frazier beat him there in the final. I would love to see it. The one question I would have about that, though, is I know that, he's a lefty. The biggest problem that the Reds had last year is you put a left-handed pitcher on the mound, you're going to shut down their lineup. They have to, if they were thinking of improving at all, in any way, shape, or form this offseason, they have to improve against left-handed pitching. And I don't know, I haven't looked at his splits, but I don't know what his splits are against left-handed pitching. So I think that would still remain a weakness even if they bring him in. And Castellanos was actually an exception to that rule for the Reds lineup of being able to hit left-handed pitching. So I would love to see it because Jock Peterson is an exciting player. But I wonder how much he would cost, and I don't know that he would fix that hole.
Yeah, well, you mentioned being bad against left-handed pitching. The Cardinals currently have 4 to 6 starters lined up for next season that are right-handed. So we'll see how that goes with the Cardinals starting rotation. What did you say?
That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's great. That's just solid. But to wrap up here, we'll finish up here shortly. It was announced on Wednesday night that you mentioned before we went on that the deadline to tender someone's contract has been moved up because of an impending lockout and impending work stoppage coming on December 1st and 2nd. I just don't see anything getting done before then. I don't know how long the stoppage is going to be. Do you have any different thoughts, any additional thoughts? That deadline being moved up, to me, is a clear tell sign that it's not happening by that deadline.
Yeah, they might as well just have come out and said, there ain't no deal getting done. We're starting the lockout December 2nd because if you're going to go to the lengths that they're going to move up that deadline, that's an important deadline. There's basically they even said in the ESPN article that I read about it is that they didn't want players who weren't sure if they were going to get tendered or not to be in limbo during the lockout. So this lockout's probably going to last a few months, and it's going to be a situation where they didn't want those guys being forced to either figure out if they're getting tendered a contract or if they were not tendered a contract, be a free agent and find somewhere else to play in about a month of time before spring training would start. I said, and this will come out tomorrow, but there's a podcast that's coming out with Jason Burke from Locked On A's, Bryce Patrick from Locked On Rangers, and Ethan Smith from Locked On Pirates, and myself, where we talk about a bunch of different stuff. And one of the things we talked about was the lockout. And they said, all right, gun to your head, how long do you think it's going to last? When's it going to end? And I said February 2nd. I think Groundhog Day is probably when we get a resolution to all of this. But I think there's going to be some time. Because when the owners came out and said war-based arbitration, I was like, oh, boy, they are far apart on any sort of deal because there's no way a player is going to agree to that.
Yeah, good luck with that. Good luck with that. No, it's unfortunate because to me, what was the sign for was coming. And again, I'm not trying to be like I predicted it, but this is a lot of people thought this was 2020 COVID shortened season, right? The debate they were having, the Players Association and the union, it was not about player safety. It was not about health. It was not about protocol. It was about how much money am I going to get? How much money? What's the prorated salary actually mean? Like, where's the money going? What's the revenue going? Teams, how much money am I losing because of this? That's when I think a lot of people started to realize they are really far apart at a really crucial time in these negotiations. This lockout is coming. I'm being optimistic. I'm going to pull a date out of thin air, and I'm going to go January 17th. Okay. That's not a birthday. That's not an anniversary. I saw it in January, and I thought 17, so I said it. January 17th. I think that's how long the lockout lasts. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's shorter, but we'll see where it goes from there. It's a sad thing because I think baseball, if it's marketed right, could really do some wonderful things right now. It's unfortunate that a lockout is pending.
Now, it's funny you mentioned that. January 17th is Martin Luther King Day. There you go.
Wow. Okay. Maybe he liked baseball. I don't know. That's a big thing.
Subliminally. Yeah. I think it's going to be, there's definitely going to be lots that comes out of this. Like we said, the DH is coming. We're probably going to see expanded playoffs in some way. I don't know how much more radical it might get than that. I think that the salary structure is going to change in some way. I don't know if there's going to be a salary cap. I know that they've been fighting for that. The owners have been trying to finagle that in there somehow. But I'm sure, Lucas, you've said something to this effect. At the end of the day, we're going to be talking about all this. We're going to give our opinions on things. We're going to give our angles on how we see these different updates of the CBA and things that they're negotiating. At the end of the day, we just want baseball.
Exactly.
And I really hope that there's not going to be a delay, because I've heard everything. I've heard somebody say it's going to get delayed. We're not going to see baseball till May. I heard somebody say there's not going to be a lockout. So obviously that's not going to happen. But
I'd like to know who they're talking to.
Right. I'm like, that might have been down the street at the local bar, but no. It's going to be weird. And the unfortunate thing is, baseball is in a position, Major League Baseball is in a position right now where they are the clear third biggest major league or professional sport.
Without a doubt.
And they're going to risk a lot more damage to their sport if this lockout lasts any kind of long and forces a delay in the season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that and again, both parties probably are going to say this. Nobody wants a delay to the season. Nobody wants a delay to spring training. Nobody wants a delay to pitchers and catchers reporting. Nobody wants a delay. Now, how willing are you to go? How willing is the players' union to bend on their request to make that happen? And vice versa. How willing are the owners willing to bend, say, okay, you can have this so we don't have a delay? How important is that really versus how important is you getting your money? I think that these contracts that we're seeing, the Wander Francos, the Fernando Tatis, these 10-plus year contracts, and in Franco's case, pretty cheap for what he's projected to do at the major league level, that could definitely be something that is brought up in terms of contract structure. I think a salary floor and a salary cap will be talked about. Definitely the level of competitiveness across Major League Baseball is going to be talked about, because I know you want more competitive baseball in Cincinnati. I know Ethan Smith of Locked On Pirates wants more competitive baseball in Pittsburgh. Yep. I just think that there are a lot of problems, and not that they're all going to get solved, and not that they all need to all get solved in the new CBA, but more problems need to be addressed than there are currently ones being addressed. And it's just unfortunate that we're at this point and that we're pushing the deadline. And I agree. I just don't think that there's anything that is going to happen in the next 2+ weeks, give or take 2 weeks and 4 days, 2 weeks and 2 days, depending on when you're listening to this, that's going to result in an agreement by that date.
That's why it's one of those things that, with this being Thanksgiving, it's like, what are we thankful for in baseball? Well, we're thankful for this, we're thankful for that, but in the back of our minds, we're like, but there's this stupid thing coming up that it's gonna be interesting how everything gets navigated. It's not gonna look pretty at all.
Nope. Hopefully we'll have brighter conversations ahead, my friend. But we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Whether you're listening to this on Wednesday or Thanksgiving, depending on how Jeff and I cut this conversation up, we thank you for tuning in, whichever day this is, on Locked On Cardinals and Locked On Reds. And Jeff, before we go, why don't you tell Locked On Cardinals listeners where they can find you?
You can catch me at Jeff Carr with 3 Fs. I've been a little less active on Twitter here recently, but that's going to ramp up soon. And you can also find the podcast literally wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube.
On YouTube, and it's free wherever you want to find it, as well as Locked On Cardinals. I'm at LJ Fastball, as you can see down here. If you're watching on the YouTube channel, at LO_Cardinals is the show's Twitter and Instagram account. So once again, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. And until Jeff and I talk to you the next time, be sure to stay safe, stay well, and have a fantastic rest of your day.